Holy crap, you're on time. What the heck? I've never seen it start Okay, we're live. Thank you. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden. I was waiting on Bishop Enoch. Hopefully we can get started until he gets here. As you know, this is the live call-in show that we're doing every Sunday. You can always call in using the link on the top of the chat in blue. But today we're going to be talking about something we've kind of been putting off for about a month, not for any particular reason except that we've been really busy, and that is the crimes of the Greek New Calendarists against the Orthodox. It's one of the things that we haven't really talked about, not because of the fact that there's anything sinister or anything to that. It's just simply that it is not covered historically. It's something that is not known. Few people understand that when the calendar was changed in Greece in 1924, the people protested. They went and they went and found priests who would serve them and continue to commune them, etc. And they could celebrate according to the traditional calendar. But the New Calendarist hierarchy was not going to take that line down, and so a series of violent persecutions ensued. The first and most notable being within the first years of 1924 to 1935, and then basically when it calmed down slightly, it picked up again with the elevations of the three hierarchs who decided to stand up against the new calendar. Unfortunately, they were thrown in jail. This would continue into the war period. And then actually with the Second World War, the persecution largely stopped. It would pick up again with the escalation of Archbishop Spiridon Vlachos of the New Calendarists in, I want to say 1951. But in any case, the point is there has always been violence against the true Orthodox, and this is acutely true in Greece, but it's one of those things that isn't talked about too much. I'm going to go through a website that it appears to be a true Orthodox Greek website from Greece. It's auto-translated, so it's not a perfect translation, but we're going to go through some of those. And as I mentioned, everyone, the call-in is open. Feel free to join the chat. So you may get some questions asked before joining, but we're looking forward to not just talking about the history of the true Orthodox in Greece, but also talking to you and answering your questions, comments, and other things live. So we'll get started. Give me just a moment while I share the screen. And let's see here. Okay, and I think this is the wrong screen, so I'm going to go to, I think it's this one. That one, hold on. Yeah, it's this one. Okay, so let me scroll up. And we're going to pull that up in StreamYard. And so let's just quickly hit the wrong button there. Let's go to share screen. Okay. So this is a website called Secret School, or it's Crufo Scoleo at Blogspot, and we're going to be dealing with it in translation. So this is kind of was an actual interesting article. It only covers the first 4 years. I was hoping to get the other one where basically there were protesters that were murdered by police. There were 3 protesters that were straight up killed in front of the New Calendar Cathedral, basically on the instigation of the New Calendar Archbishop. But we're going to start with the very beginning because there's plenty to go through right here. And so, let's go through that. The first thing we're going to notice here, there's a political cartoon, there, and this is basically it's a threat of, for the lay people who follow this, the new calendar. The old calendar by a new calendarist hierarch. As you can see, that's supposed to be a bishop with a stick. And the article is titled "The Persecution of the Greek Old Calendarists." Whenever you see paleo, logimetroi, etc., that's paleo is old and logimetroi is calendar. So that's where that comes from. By the official church during the first years of the calendar innovation, 1924 to 1928. Now there is a speech here. But this is it's a pretty good introduction. Basically, what we're talking about here, it talks about how fanatical and extreme, and we've all heard this. Anyone who has been on this show, anyone who has been listening, has probably asked questions about the true Orthodox, the old calendarists, and you've gotten they're fanatics, they're extremists. They weren't the ones that were killing people. This is one of the main things that we need to really reorient our brains around, is the simple fact that when we're talking about the true Orthodox versus the new calendarists, we weren't the ones initiating violence. Despite their best attempts, the simple reality is historically, the violence has been on their side. And that's not, one could make the argument, well, what if the government was on your side? Well, if the government was on our side, we wouldn't have done anything. So the point is, because there wouldn't have been any need to change anything. But again, this comes back to the entire ecumenical globalist program that now has become obvious to everyone. Even the most hardened ecumenists in world orthodoxy will admit, oh yeah, there's this whole new world order. There's this whole, globalization, global government, the WEF, etc. But you know what they won't point to? They won't point to this, because this is what actually starts all of it. They won't point to the fact that the first thing they had to do was break people's faith in God. So as we continue through this article that we are sharing here, it goes through this, and we are going to look here. This is an early newspaper article in 1924. The first great feast after the calendar innovation was the Annunciation of the Virgin. After its celebration with the new calendar passed on the evening of April 6, many believers gathered in various churches of Greece to celebrate with the old one, the Vespers of the feast, the traditional feast day of the new calendar. So these are newspaper articles that talk about this. In the metropolis of Athens, hundreds of believers asked the priest to perform the service, but Metropolitan Chrysostomus Papadopoulos had expressly forbidden it, threatening any priest who dared to do so with penalty of excommunication. In fact, he also sent a police force to expel the crowd and seal the temple, while he ordered all the churches to be closed so that Annunciation would not be celebrated anywhere. Then it goes on. In Thessaloniki, 2,000 Christians gathered at night in the Church of the Evangelist and asked for a liturgy for the next day's holidays. Metropolitan Gennadius Alexakis sent police who dispersed the crowd of believers, arresting 3 people, while the next day he ordered all the churches to be closed and not even to chant the usual hymn to prevent deviance, so any change that the people might try to sing the original chant. So he actually just closed churches. So this is one of the more interesting facets of the introduction of new calendarism. Rather than risk people celebrating according to the traditional calendar, they'd rather close the church. Now, having all of us lived through the COVID period, we all know that closing churches is it's a horrible governmental phenomenon. But it's going on even here, where the people are just trying to be Orthodox, and the new calendar authorities, along with the government, are like, we'll just close the churches down. So from the beginning, the governing church showed its dispositions towards those who insisted on not accepting the new calendar. Simply following the old calendar was considered a crime, and thus the condemnations of the clergy were made on the old calendar. The first sentence against the cleric was not long in coming. In April or May of 1924, 72-year-old vicar of IN Agiu Dimitriou Asapirgu, I guess that's the name of the church, Father Demetrius Dennis, 1852 to 1927, was punished with a 10-day holiday because he did not comply with the calendar innovation. That's a list of the arrests there. Gradually, throughout the Greek territory, with the help of the state, prosecutions for the enforcement of the innovation began. This is how the magazine of the Patriarch of Alexandria, Pandanios, describes the situation. For whom the inexplicable study about the imposition of the new calendar has produced fruits of bitterness and corruption every day, witnessing daily in Greece riots and violence where churches are closed and Christians are prevented from religious duties by military force, and priests roam from island to island, being tried for violating the calendar regulations or observing the regime. Were written in oral news from there provide the condemnation, beyond doubt. You insist on the old, the patriarchal tradition on the ecclesiastical calendar? If you happen to be a layman, the temple is closed to you. You are forbidden to participate. The harvest awaits you. Do you insist on the calendar of your religion, your church, your conscience? If you're found to be a priest, you're sentenced to a day off. Clean yourself. You're banned. What will the persecuted of Christianity achieve now? What heresies did the heresies invent against the Orthodox? So we get to the holy day of Christmas, the Nativity. The old calendarists decided to hold the Holy Vigil at the Church of the Holy Healer in Goudi. Many people from Athens and from the province gathered in the then small temple, and the procession began. But the Metropolitan again sent the army to disperse the crowd, which exceeded 2, or according to others, 3,000. First, an officer arrived with 2 non-commissioned officers and ordered the faithful to leave the church. When they refused, they drew revolvers. Then they invaded the sanctuary and addressed the priest, Father Partenios Iberitis, with whom the following revealing dialogue ensued. Papa, what are you going to read tonight? The Christmas service, answered the priest. No, says the officer in exasperation, you will read the liturgy of St. John. There's newspaper articles about this. This is not something legendary. We're literally going into the 100th anniversary of these horrendous things happening in Greece. In front of the priest's insistence to perform the Christmas service, the officer ordered him to leave the church, but Father Parthenios replied, I am one of the clergy who did not recognize the reform of the calendar. I was called to officiate in this temple, and I will not leave it when I finish the service. Then one of the non-commissioned officers rushed to remove his cloak, but the faithful overtook him and with acclamations forced the guard to retreat. And after a while, a car with 40 armed soldiers appeared, and the leader ordered the operation to stop. Faced with the priest's refusal and the large crowd of believers who remained in his place, they remained idle, guarding the church from the outside. The next day, Chrysostomos Papadopoulos announced that he would depose Father Parthenios. I'm going to take a moment here to stop here so that I can address some comments that I've seen here. I know that one of the earlier ones that I saw was about Wazdes asked, I know Vladika Enoch said at one time the persecution was there in true Orthodox history in Romania, was a lot worse in different ways. Can't find much. In some ways it was worse in the sense that the authorities were far more willing to kill people. As horrible as that sounds, at the very least, you do find stories in even, in Greece and Russia, but in Greece, you do find stories of soldiers even converting, police officers converting, realizing that they're hurting innocent people. That's a lot less common in Romania. It does happen, but the murders were much faster and frankly, much more violent. The attitude was not disperse or die, it was just die. So we'll get to that next week. But it's unfortunate. Now I noticed that so Aaron said nice choice of music. Thank you for that. It was free. And I see here Jonathan Britt, thank you. He thanks us here. Well, no problem. We're glad to do it. And he wrote, true Orthodoxy is true only if it is true. You can edit the words of Father Seraphim Rose to fit your Masonic Orthodoxy, but we know what you do. Father Seraphim Rose was and remains genuine Orthodox, true Orthodox, anti-ecumenist, and anti-Sergianist. He was and remains against compromise regardless of how new editions of his book read. This is very true. We did talk about this on last week's episode when we talked about the memory hole, how they've changed editions to make it seem like Father Seraphim kind of sort of approved the new calendars, which he did not. And so basically, again, welcome one and all to our live stream. We're talking about the crimes of the Greek New Calendarists against the Orthodox, and we're going to intersperse it over time with your comments. And again, if you're looking to call in live and have any questions, comments, concerns, want to debate in Orthodox, just click on the blue link on the top, and we'll continue from there. We are still waiting for Bishop Enoch. I have not heard. I saw that he was available earlier today, so he could just be busy. Things happen. Either way, we are keeping this live stream going until 11 o'clock. And so we're going to just keep going. And there's a lot more data to cover. So let's get back into it. So let's get here. So we get to 1925. We've covered the first year of the calendar innovation. That was 1924 in Greece. And of course, we just dealt with the disaster that was the Nativity service, which involved thousands of people, the military intervening repeatedly, and finally deposing the priest who celebrated. But of course, as you know, with Nativity comes Theophany. So a few days later, the feast of the Theophany arrived, which would be in 1925. The vigil was held at the Church of St. Theodoros of Pylo. Today it belongs to New Smyrna, with the participation of approximately 3,500 believers. The police intervened once again at the instigation of the innovative metropolitan and dispersed the crowd of believers by force. The Association of the Orthodox had predicted this due to the events of Nativity, which is why Vespers as well as Orthros had been planned to be held at night in the said church, and the Divine Liturgy of the ceremony of the great sanctification of the waters to be done in the Church of St. George's Chirotagaros in Paleo by the late priest, Father Ioannis Flores. So here you can see that they're already starting to realize that the police, the military, the organization is after them. So now they're trying to do different things by celebrating pieces of the services in one place while still doing things like the great blessing of the waters for Epiphany in the other. And so that is kind of where they're going with this. By now, within a year, they realize there is no peaceful solution. But the army invaded and dispersed a crowd of believers by force, and many arrests were made. We read a characteristic passage when describing the banning of the sequence from the press of the time. When he heard about the continuation of the procession, the officer probably got angry. Not a little time passed. He then directed a strong order to them in the name of the law disperse, and ordered the men under him, armed with spears, to rush towards the congregation. First, he gave the signal to start striking through the underbelly of the weapon intimated afterwards, and the men under him. Many received blows from truncheons. Women's hair is torn. The outside shrine with the holy icons, the table where the candles were placed, are thrown to the ground. But without showing any resistance, the crowd protested against such vandalism. And there's an article in the press from that period. During the rest of the year, we did not have any serious incident because of the well-known dictatorship of Panagalos took place, which proved to be more philanthropic than the hierarchs of the governing church. This is another thing that actually to keep in mind. In some ways, the instability of the government in Greece actually helped the true Orthodox, because with the Venizelos, they were all out against them, but because of the different factions that were still vying for power in modern Greece today, the true Orthodox were able to survive, sometimes because they just get a break. Some other dictator would take over and he'd be like, I don't care what they're doing on the calendar, and he'd just be like, okay, whatever. He was busy consolidating power, and that actually worked to our advantage. In 1926, as early as 1924, the nuns of the monastery of Kirovini in Tinos, at the urging of Elder Philotheos Servakos, had refused to accept the calendar innovation. After much pressure and in the face of their persistent refusal, the Metropolitan of Syros, Athanasius Levantopoulos, devised another way. He threatened the family priest of the monastery, Father Matthäus Evripiotis, that he would depose him if he continued to operate with the old calendar. The priest gave in, and the abbess Eufrosina and the nuns who refused to comply were referred in October 1925 to the local ecclesiastical court, in which they were punished with penalties of deprivation of their positions in the monastery and in exile. The nuns did not recognize the condemnation decision, and for that they were sued by the Metropolitan at the Synod of the governing church. Thereafter, a mock trial, which took place on April 1st to 14th, 1926, they were sentenced, except for the abbess, who asked for forgiveness, to be removed from the monastic order and excommunicated. The crowd of believers that gathered for support was dispersed by the police. On the same day, in the monastery, the nuns of the same beliefs made a plea in favor of the successful outcome of the trial in the cell of the nun Pelagia Carusis. The monastery was peculiar. During the prayer, the temporary abbess installed by the innovator, Metropolitan Hieronymo Vocino, along with some of the nuns who accepted the new calendar and other lay people, invaded and beat the nuns, leaving the old calendar nuns Magdalene and Anastasius unconscious from the wood. At the same time, the ecclesiastical publications of the official church, such as Ecclesia and Anaplasis, as well as several political newspapers, launched a barrage of attacks and insults against the old calendarists, who were characterized as fanatics, religious people, latecomers, to mention the most common ones. At Christmas 1926, we had incidents mainly in the countryside. In Thessaloniki again, Gennadius prevented the Orthodox from celebrating the great holiday, and when the crowd protested, the police were called in again. In Megara, the residents, defying the pressures and threats of the police authorities, who threatened until the last moment that they would arrest and shoot those who dare come to the Christmas service, celebrated the holiday with courage. In Salamina and Karditsa, the police forces, in consultation with the church authorities, sealed the chapel so that the true Orthodox who were without a church would not celebrate. With that, we can end 1926. Let's get back to our main screen where I'm not reading. Give me just a moment, and let's take a look here. So it looks like we've got a few more comments coming in. Again, feel free to call in if you want. We are waiting for Bishop Enoch. I have not yet heard from him. But we're taking a break, especially since we're getting to the last part, 1927 to 1928. We're going to keep it live. We're going to take more questions, more comments. We're going to keep on working with it. I do see that there is, Father Antonios writes, I have a 1990 and 2013 edition of Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. On page 220 of the 1990 edition, he says, few Orthodox jurisdictions that have taken strong stands against the apostasy of our times. The Catacomb Church of Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church of Russia, outside Russia, and the True Orthodox Christians, Old Calendarists of Greece. And to this, we can add, of course, the True Orthodox of Romania and Bulgaria, who were lesser known because of their unique situations. And they really weren't even well known to the rest of the Orthodox world until probably the early 1980s. So, thank you for that, Father Antonius. That's a great find. Unfortunately, we are currently battling the religion of the future. Most people don't even know it. We're in the future, battling the apostasy and fighting the ecumenism, modernism, and Sergianism of our day. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody and say thank you for listening. It is a live call-in show, so we will be doing that again until 11 tonight. So if you've dealt with somebody or had somebody who was saying, well, this just doesn't sound right, or you've been name called, invite them over. Let's have a discussion. That's what we're here for. But until we get to that and we have that occurring, let us, as a matter of fact, now that I have this handy new 2-screen setup, I am going to be able to do other things. I can now see the screen and see the comments at the same time. Aha! Father Antonios continues. Wait a second. Guys, I'm going to just take this off. I didn't realize it still said stream starting soon. Father Antonios notes, in the 2013 edition, changes it to, but there are some left on other Orthodox churches. Well, that's convenient. So, now it's just like it could be any Orthodox, it could be the OCA. But, the point is, obviously, the original reference back much closer to when Father Seraphim reposed in the bosom of the Russian Church abroad. noted the Russian Catacomb Church, the Russian Orthodox churches, the True Orthodox of Greece, to which we can add the Romanians, Bulgarians, later the Serbians, and more. But the point is, this new edition in 2013, well after the Christ the Savior Brotherhood, the St. Herman Brotherhood, had sold out and joined the Serbian church, they had been making their own convenient changes to the books, which, again, I reference you back to last week's discussion where we talked about the memory hole. Unfortunately, we are in the midst of it. We are seeing people rewrite history so they can lie about history, and it's so that they can deceive people further. And it's got to stop, and it's got to stop yesterday. So let's get to 1927. 1927, in Halkidiki, on the eve of the Epiphany, according to the church calendar, the minister of the Holy Orthodox Church, Father Hilarion, was arrested without reason by the police force. As a result, more than 1,000 Old Calendar residents besieged the house where the minister was being held and succeeded in freeing him. So the next day they celebrated the Feast of the Epiphany, but their joy did not last long, since a significant military force arrived, whose captain gathered the inhabitants in the village square, and after surrendering the priests of the new calendar, specific Old Calendarists began to arrest them. They arrested approximately 20 Christians and were taken to Polygyros, where they were remanded in custody for 20 days and sentenced to 3 months in prison. I'd like to take a moment to just remind you that these people were trying to rescue a priest to celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany. They then went to jail for 3 months. The community of Mount Athos issued a statement prohibiting the monks of Agiore to serve the Old Calendarists. That's interesting because they were serving them the whole time. So I'm wondering if that's something in translation, because Athos was generally much more in support of the True Orthodox than any other place in Greece. So I'm curious as to that translation. This is where we get to probably the most eventful, biggest event of the period. In the year 1927 was marred by the murder of the new martyr Catherine Rowdis. In Mandara, Attica, the faithful of the patriarchs had prepared to celebrate with a vigil the feast of the Feast of the Generals. I'm going to just see how that translates, because I don't know the Feast of the Generals. The Takiarchs. Okay, so the Feast of the Archangels. After Vespers, a guard of gendarmes appeared with orders to break up the congregation and arrest the minister, Father Christoforos Salidas. The worshippers locked themselves in the temple, and the gendarmes frantically started banging on the doors to break them, while they broke the window panes, but their raid was prevented by the iron railings. When the vigil ended, the faithful left the temple, covering the priests with their bodies. The gendarmes started shooting for intimidation. More than 40 shots were fired, while one bullet slightly wounded Angeliki Cazzarello in the head. They then began to beat the worshippers and the priests with their gunmen. Caterini Rowdy, a young mother of 4, was seriously injured in the head and taken to Evangelismos, where she died a few days later. So just to describe the scene, keep in mind that these people are all surrounding the priest, basically guarding them with their bodies, and they're basically beating these people with the butts of their rifles to get to the priest. Another woman, the neo-martyr Heraclea Liulis, was arrested, imprisoned, and died of hardships a few months later, specifically on the Sunday of Orthodoxy on March 5th, 1928. So she died a few days later. The last month, or the news, we read in a newspaper of the time about her funeral. Last Monday, the funeral of the new martyr Heraclea Liulis was held in Mandra of Eleusis, as magnificent as it was nighttime. The metastasis suffered from cerebral lightning congestion as a result of the hardship she suffered in prison, where she had been thrown months ago, as she took part in a liturgy performed according to the old calendar. The dedication of the metastasis to the sacred traditions was such that it reached the point of self-sacrifice. The priest Vasilios Sakarolopoulos was called to this from Athens, recited the eulogy of the deceased, and her funeral was a true pilgrimage of the faithful to a saint. So there we see that the lesson most True Orthodox have heard of Catherine Rowdis, but few remember. I mean, I assume in Greece they do, but most English converts are unaware that another new martyr died. Even though she did not die immediately as St. Catherine did, she basically died from cerebral hemorrhages in the hospital a couple of months later. So this is, it's kind of gross. You know, you're a mom of 4, you go to church, and the next thing you know, you're dead protecting the priest. But hey, again, that's what you get for being a schismatic. I mean, you deserve it. As horrible, I mean, I'm being sarcastic, obviously, but the point is, when it comes right to it, that is the attitude many people have. And that is one of indifference to truth and obsession with authority. Rather than look at the authority of the Holy Fathers, rather than look at the authority of the traditions of our church, it's whoever's in charge and they can do whatever they want. Well, look at the governments of the world now. I mean, look at the United States now. I mean, is that the authority you want to follow? We're in a period of time, and this is true in Russia too, and any Russian nationalist, any true Orthodox will tell you, when illegitimate authority takes over, just as it did in 1924, just as it did in 1917 with the fall of the Tsar, you're under only a limited obligation to be obedient to it insofar as it acts in an evil and satanic manner. This was even true. People say, well, what about during the Ottoman occupation? Do you think that they were completely unresistant during the Ottoman occupation? Or what about during the Muslim occupation of Spain? We will be covering that in a book report. Christians would not submit to Satanism under the guise of authority. That is the essence of Sergianism. So we're going to take a moment here. A couple of comments here. Wazna writes to Father Antonios, it's a shame that many try to paint Father Seraphim into someone who historically he wasn't. Well, they don't have much of a choice. You're going to either they have to admit they're wrong or they lie. I mean, those are the choices you have. And when you're faced with those choices, unfortunately, since we're dealing with people who are rather accustomed to lying, they go with lies. That's what you do. Unfortunately, that leads to where people are thinking, oh, I'm following Father Seraphim, even though you're acting in a way completely against him. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality we live in. And this is why I even mentioned it in that second debate with Andrew of the Crucible. Ultimately, it's worse than the people just dealing with open heretics. They're dealing with liars who are pretending that they believe something they don't. And that is far more dangerous and far more painful. I feel sorry for those trapped in the Episcopal systems that they're in. But all they have to do is leave. They know we're here. If they could get over the name calling and pretending that, oh, well, we're going to get new bishops from somewhere and historically and stuff. Yeah, okay. That's what people said in the 1930s. See how that worked out. Father Antonios writes, trying to pass off a lie as truth. Hard not to think about who the father of lies is. It's satanic. I hate to, not that I hate to call it out as satanic. It's just that it's almost, it can be used as parody. Oh, you're accusing it. Do you think it's all Satan? Well, yeah, it's obviously satanic. I mean, we're talking about murders and assaults of Christian people, grandmothers, moms of kids and stuff. And yeah, that murdering them because they're on the church calendar is evil. And people who say that that's not evil are being evil. So let's continue on. And Aaron writes, people forget that Christ told the apostles to go and buy swords to protect themselves on the road during their preaching. Yeah, that's true. And I think that, when we're talking about, especially in the early church, there were a small grouping that were surrounded by wolves and, frankly, dealing with opportunist criminals. And yeah, that's a reality that we're dealing with now. But at the very least, as much as I dislike the Roman Empire before it was Christian, their government was considerably more honest than ours. I can't really argue that they were pretty open about persecuting Christians, and they were pretty open as to the why. But these are people, especially when we're talking about the State Church of Greece, these are people who are claiming to be the defenders of orthodoxy. That should really give people pause. Like, you're claiming, if you look at the Greek constitution, it talks about the defending of the Orthodox Church as and they're talking about the new Calendarists. That's been something that's even been debated among true Orthodox in Greece in terms of legal changes, whether they could still refer to themselves as part of the church as defined by the United Nations and as defined by the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Is that still the church? And it's been a debate because then, like people are like, well, are you saying you're a different religion? Look, we didn't put ourselves into the legal predicaments that we find ourselves throughout the world. The world did. We just have to react. Wazna continues, liars and wolves. Yeah, that's unfortunately that's unchanged. And Sava writes, I was thinking about that the other day. I was thinking, why did St. Peter have a sword when Christ was being captured by the Sanhedrin's men? Well, clearly it wasn't to chop off his ear. We know that. That's why our Lord fixed it. However, yeah, there were bandits on the road. There were people who were going to try to take everything they had and kill them. That's not too different from today, if in any major city. Unfortunately, we sometimes we look at it like, oh, that's ancient history. Is it? I mean, is it? Like you read of massacres. Oh, there was a massacre of 100 people that occurred in this village. And then you're like, oh, well, we're well past that. But then we start crying about Chicago crime statistics. Like things haven't changed all that much because we has the internet. People are still evil, and our job is still to preach to them and to offer the hope of salvation. So yeah, no, that's a very good point. Okay, so we're done with the comments here. And in that case, I'm going to see if we can finish this up. On this side, a similar incident to the one in Mandra took place in Thessaloniki, where fortunately there were no victims. Specifically during the feast of St. Demetrius, the commander of the Calendarists police, by order of Metropolitan Gennadium, sealed the temple of the three hierarchs and placed a guard to guard it. When the people began to gather outside the temple in protest, a strong police force intervened and severely beat the crowd, which consisted mainly of women and children. Lovely. The exact same thing happened during the Christmas vigil in the other privately owned church of the Orthodox in Thessaloniki, Agia Lusa. So now they were going into privately owned churches because, it's not enough that they were like, we're going to kick you out of the official churches where you were serving. Now they're like, okay, we're going into people's houses now. And so this is how sleazy people have gotten on the new calendar side. And keep in mind, the new calendar change is only 3 years old right now. We're still we're in the 4th year of this. And these people are acting like communists. They sound like Satanists. It's terrible. In February 1928, in Thessaloniki again, an unheard of sacrilege took place. A large police force stormed the temple of the three hierarchs and dispersed the crowd, arresting several Christians. But Lieutenant Sifakis of the 2nd Police Department was not satisfied with this and boldly broke into the sanctuary from the beautiful gate and, grabbing the minister father, tearing his garments. On the Sunday of Orthodoxy in 1928 in Pania, then Leopesi, we had new episodes. The police station chief, Georgios Maliaris, invaded the chapel of Agia Marina with 2 gendarmes and tried to arrest the minister, Father Parthenios Agioritis. In the face of his vigorous defense by the villagers, however, he took out a revolver and threatened to shoot the believers. The assistance of the Koropi police station was requested, and the president of the branch, Mr. Kolias, was arrested. On April 6th, 1928, an incredible event occurred. One thing I must say, if you can get to this page, I'm going to share this page only because the newspaper clips themselves are worth it. But on April 6, 1928, an incredible event occurred. Thousands of believers who had gathered in Piraeus in order to go to Tinos to celebrate the Annunciation of the Virgin during the national holiday calendar were surprised to learn that, following pressure from the Archdiocese of Athens, the Minister of the Interior forbade the sailing of the ship. Immediately, hundreds of Orthodox who had already bought the ticket of 70,000 drachmas rushed through the electric railway to Athens and gathered outside the parliament to protest against this unprecedented measure against them. There they spread their blankets and sit down with their lamps, which they placed upon Agia in their hands, waiting for the decision to lift the blockade. This image moves the passers-by who approach and ask to be informed about what is happening. At that moment, however, an order is given and the police fire pump starts dousing the crowd to disperse it, and voices of protest are heard. What did we do to you that you rain on us? What do we owe you? Why don't you let us go and worship the Virgin Mary? And we continue to read the same in the same newspaper of the time. The pump continues to fail. However, waterproof old calendars do not dissolve. Only the little children brought with them by the old calendar mothers, they let out beautiful cries. And while the pump is constantly drenching the old-timers, the soldiers with spears are concerning those who, in order to protect themselves from the rain, want to enter the precincts of Parliament to protect themselves. For the record, the sailing was ultimately not allowed. Just to understand, they were making a pilgrimage to a Theotokos icon, and they were banned at the exact moment they thought their ship was going to leave. So all of them lost their money. So they go and they try to protest, and they protest in front of Parliament, and, well, they get fire hosed. And so when we get further, during Holy Week, we had new persecutions. In Salamis, during the service of Maundy Thursday, a group of police officers led by Lieutenant Stathopoulos invaded the chapel of Agios Athanasios in Mulki with the aim of arresting the priest Father Gideon, prior of the holy monastery of Konstantomonitos. Faced with the reaction of the faithful, the arrest was prevented, and the police, in retaliation, arrested the monks Arsenios Chirohakis and Nectarios Kokoulakis, who in the Dissension Center now chanted the Immaculate Passion of our Lord. In Menidi, the Orthodox invited Father Vasilios Sakalaropoulos to officiate, but by order of Archbishop Chrysostomus, the police arrested him and took him to the Migration Department. There were gathered around 300 believers who, after protests, managed to achieve his release. So outside of only a couple of murders, for the most part, the first few years were mainly just throwing people in jail to get sick in prison and die, and they're attempted murders and a lot of lay people trying to protest to save their priests from prison. In May, again in Thessaloniki, we had new deviations. Let's see how a newspaper of the time describes them. Last week, the Orthodox Christians, following the patriarchal litany, wanted to make a litany for the cessation of earthquakes in one of the churches here owned by the Orthodox Association, aiming after the end of the litany to collect funds for the ismopaths. I assume that's for victims. This action greatly angered the local Metropolitan Gennadian, who ordered the police to prevent the Christians from making a litany and ordered to arrest the priests and send them to the prisons in irons. In fact, the police agencies like to execute illegal orders when they're going to make fun of the Rasim in the church, and after they dispersed the Christians with the bayonet, they arrested the priests as if they were communists, at which time they performed the litany, and after treating them as if they were criminals of the hand, they tied them up and locked them in the prisons, from which the next day they were taken to Athens. The director of this publication, informed of the events, went to the Athenian prison and demanded to know what happened. He describes the following in this form. After recounting the above, the priest described in the darkest colors the behavior of the police authorities and condemned the attitudes of Metropolitan Gennadiou and the other priests who persecute priests because they follow the national holiday calendar and do not accept to become Franks. And the propagandists of other sects could leave them free to carry out their tyrannical work. Before he could finish the conversation with the priests, the gendarmes came and received them by order of Chrysostomus and led them to the exile that he chose for them. Finally, we continue. The persecutions continue throughout the year, throughout the country. On the night of the 14th to the 15th of August, with the old one in Litoselo Theotida, the gendarmes occupy the church of Agios Georgios and forbid the priests and faithful to worship. In the fall, the refugees from the Saras region who escaped the massacres of the Turks send Venizelos a memorandum which reads, among other things, the following. We who have come to the hospital land of Mother Greece are truly appalled by the brutal and inhumane measures as taken against the true Orthodox. The old calendarists, as Orthodox Christians, as Greek citizens, demand that which is carried out by the non-religious, including the Papists, the Protestants, and the non-constitutional Freemasons. That is, the free church and a designated church with like-minded priests. This is a desire. We support this desire with our blood, but if the honorable government does not grant what we ask for, we want to finally, by all legal means, ask for the protection of the League of Nations. So within 4 years, the true Orthodox had gotten to the point where they were going to ask the equivalent of the UN to help them because the government was not. The government was hostile, was torturing them, was mistreating them, was murdering them. We've gone through a lot of it here. And this is 4 years. This entire program as we speak, we're at almost an hour, is literally 1924 to 1928. We haven't even touched from 1928 to 1935. I don't even know I have the text for that. Or from 1951 onwards. We may have to even do another show. I'd like to talk about the things we've already dealt with. And here we go. We continue. We close the year 1928 and the speech with the reference to a brave hieromonk, Father Arsenios Sakalaris. Father Arsenios, vicar of the villages of Pyrgos and Vitolis in the diocese of Thitiotido at the time, did not accept the calendar innovation from the beginning. And for that reason, he was denounced and sentenced to excommunication in 1926. The priest, of course, being aware that his false excommunication as illegal, did not have any authority. He continued to officiate. Following a second complaint against him, he was arrested without warrant on the afternoon of the 9th of April, 1928, and is taken to the police department of Lamia. The next day, the warden Arapostathis Efstathios, together with a gendarme, put handcuffs on Father Arsenios, and the first one started to hold him tightly while the gendarme cut the beard and hair with a big pair of scissors and then with a clipper. This horrible event, which took place at the suggestion of Metropolitan of Theodidis Iacobus Papioannou, did not discourage the true Orthodox, who gave an intelligent response through a letter from a brother in a newspaper at the time. The martyric hieromonk, without a doubt, and chastised, will perform the various sacrificial acts, since the various chastised priests of the Archdiocese of Athens are performing the same, with the difference that they are waxed in the various barber shops of the capital voluntarily, while the unfortunate Archsenios was forcibly taken into the Lamia police station. After his trial, Father Arsenios was referred to the criminal court of Lamia, where he was sentenced to 95 days in prison, but appealed, and a new trial was set at the Athens Court of Appeal. The trial took place on November 28th, and the then 56-year-old hieromonk was sentenced to 2 months in prison and taken to the infamous old barracks prison in Monastiraki. About 800 prisoners were housed in those prisons under miserable conditions, humidity, bugs, drugs, use of weapons, daily conflict. In other words, it was a pretty nasty prison. In these prisons, a journalist managed to get an interview in December of 1928 from the incarcerated Father Arsenios, which is worth reading as an epilogue to this speech. In the inner prison of the old barracks in Monastiraki, I learned how a priest was in prison because he celebrated with the old calendar and was without wasting time in prison. What do you want, sir? Papa Arsenio, come in. I said Papa because Pope is translated often with Google Translate with Russian and Greek. Pope in Russian, Pope, and in Greek Papa is just Father. Come in. I am led to the famous dungeon of the Venetian times, which serves as a prison and punishment for human transgressions. And from afar, without any sign of his identity, I can make out the masked convict. As soon as I saw the face of the imprisoned Father Arsenios, he was, or rather, they said, he was exposed. A calmness pervades his entire face, a simple and bright look, a posture testifying to faith, a posture imposed, testifying to turmoil. My father, I bow down, I say to the inspiring figure of the priest, and I bend down and take hold of his right hand. A smile barely erased on the stuck lips of the Christian priest with a paternal expression accompanies the return of his greeting, the Lord, my child. My father, I'm a journalist, and I tell you the truth. In addition to this, I'm possessed by a true curiosity to learn and to hear from the mouth of your holiness. First, what do you believe? Why did you become a priest? Why did you not follow the new calendar and the innovations? Second, will you stand your ground, and how much? And the priest answers, my child, I would be very happy and would pray the Lord my God, whom I adore, for whose sake I'm in prison, would give me reasons capable of answering your questions. And you have made the sign of the cross, he says, with childish innocence and with an invisible and barely discernible holy fear. I am a village priest with few letters, not to say illiterate. As a layman, I believed, and I believe, and as a priest, I believe in one God, the symbol of our faith, namely the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testaments, and what our fathers, the saints, established in writing and handed down through our church through tradition. In 3 words, Scriptures, traditions, and the ecumenical councils. Here's my faith as a layman. My faith as a priest, since the Holy God required me, his worthless and unworthy servant, to perform his divine, holy, and unfathomable mysteries, included my own faith, which I had as a layman, and even a confession, an oath officially before the strength of God and people, that I will keep the faith undefiled, my ecclesiastical duties, as I received them and was taught them, without adding or excluding, and without hesitation or ambivalence, unscathed. This I confessed, this I kept. This is what I keep, and with this faith will I die. I became a priest, I, my unworthy child of God the Most High, Christ God my Savior, and I will remain with his help until death in my class. What else, my child, did you ask of me? Why did you become a priest? Oh, here's one thing I didn't confess until now. My mama and our church inspired me that the best thing that anyone can achieve in this world is, quote, to save his soul, to please God, to do good and benevolent, and not worship the world, but God. This lesson was absorbed by my soul, and I became a priest, not to win my man, priest by profession, as you literate people tell you, but of the church of the Orthodox priest, to save my soul. That is why I'm not interested in the orders of Annas and Caiaphas, nor in what they will have if they submit to the disrespect of the change of the surrender, but for my flock, for the sheep that Christ has entrusted to me, for me, humble and at least his servant. That is why I do not follow the new calendar, because it wasn't given to me when I became priest. And since with the old calendar, my holy fathers praised and worshipped God, and worship thus offered to the Holy Trinity and to honor to the saints was true and normal and holy, so that they become two holy servants of God and entered the bosom of Abraham, but also those who want to enter because of their holiness and their divinely inspired writings. And I ask you, Mr. Journalist, what do we need the innovation of the new calendar for? The new Pascha, the theaters, and the cut hair, to collaborate with the Protestants, and I don't know what else the modernist hierarchs want, to take us to heaven or hell, to God or to the devil. Everything has a reason. It serves a purpose in the church. The unique and essential purpose of the church is to make the Christian a saint, that is, worthy to enter heaven. And since with the old feast day all the sanctified have seen paradise until today, i.e. about 2,000 years, why do we want the new? What good will it do us? You can say to me, my dear journalist, what the president of the Court of Appeal said to me before yesterday at my trial. Do you know more priests than the Metropolitan? I'm answering you, my child. Do you know more priests or the Metropolitan? I'm answering you, my child. Do you know more priests than the Metropolitan? And I'm answering you, my child. And from me, the illiterate Pope, and from the Metropolitan, the learned, my fathers, the saints, know. Chrysostom, Basil, Gregory, and so many others. And since they worshiped God with the old calendar, and all the 2,000 fathers who make up the 7 ecumenical synods ordered us to perform our duties as priests and ladies, how do you want me to break my oath? And should I deny my holy fathers and follow the shorn hierarchs? This will never happen. I believe, my child, as I believe I am a priest of the Most High, and not of the church you have moved, but as the apple of your eye keep it, I remain, by the grace of the Lord, a priest of Christ, and not one of the shorn high priests. And I will always officiate as long as I am not prevented by Pilate's lances from entering the house of God, because neither by immoral actions nor by heretical thoughts was I defiled, but my hair was cut and I was put in prison because I kept and keep my oath and my faith. But what do the scriptures say? God, it's better to obey God than men. Go to, my child, it sings the same way. And blessed by you, the faithful and admirable and loving priest of Orthodoxy departed to the sunless house of the prisons, so there he could worship God who strengthened him. Closing the speech, we must emphasize that by quoting these documents concerning the persecutions of our ancestors, we seek not to breed hatred, but to glorify hypocrisy, nor to increase the dimension, but project the truth, which liberates and brings people closer. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the text from 1924 to 1928. It is shared in the text there, in the chat. So we've completed that. I was kind of hoping to have stuff going up to 1935. I kind of was also hoping Bishop Enoch would be here. So there were a couple of things that didn't quite go right, but we have gone so far. We did complete that first hour. Of course, this is a live Q&A, so we're inviting anyone who wants to come in, ask questions. Feel free to ask in the chat. Feel free to jump on the phone and call us live. Well, not the phone. I mean, you call on the computer. But the point is, so that's what we're going to do. But because of the fact that I've been going without a co-host, I am going, if you don't mind, I am going to just quickly go to something here, and I'm going to take a quick water break, but it would be cruel of me to take a quick water break while not giving people something to work with here. So what I am going to do, if I can, give me one moment, is we're going to go back to Smetava's Vltava, and we'll be right back, and I will be back before it is completed. So let me change this to moment. Let's shut that off there. Just going to do some fun technical things. Okay. Okay, we're back again. We've been covering first hour. We covered the crimes of the Greek New Calendars against the Orthodox between 1924 to 1928. It is a live call-in session, and we've got people calling in. So we are going to. I'm going to try to see if I can get everyone on an order. It looks like Sabo is here first, and then I'm going to go through comments because I see that quite a few of them have popped up since I went for my water break. So let's get started. Okay, so Saba, can you hear me?
Hello. There's really bad echo. Let me move real quick. Let me just mute my mic for a second. Hello. Okay. I think it might be better now.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, I see there's a little bit of an echo. I apologize. I don't know what's going on this time, but yes, let me see if I can maybe turn my phone volume down. Okay. Sorry. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, it's good to have you. So, comments, questions? What are your thoughts?
I think to go with the theme of the stream here of the persecution of the true Orthodox at the hands of new calendarists, it might be interesting to note specific examples of saints. One that came to mind is Saint Harambos, the Fool for Christ. If I recall, I read somewhere anyway, and did my phone just die? Okay, no, it's still up. I don't know what that was about. I recall reading somewhere from the life of Saint Harambos that he was hospitalized, and they called him crazy and whatnot. Like, not Fool for Christ crazy, but like schizophrenic. And They did that to quite a few people. They did in the Soviet Union. Is this
I was going to say
correct?
that was actually common in the Soviet period as well in Russia. The state would use all manner of violence against its citizens when they weren't going along with the plan. So yeah, it does not surprise me that they would do that to Saint Haralambos at all. It's unfortunately part of. And some people didn't, they didn't make it through, like Father Dmitry Dubko. Unfortunately, it's a sad testament to it's when we think about it, because there's so many people who are coming into Orthodoxy now in the internet era, and this sort of violence against the people has been so memory hold that they have these myopic ideas of what the state was really like and can be really like, even in the wake of something like COVID.
Yes, I know as well from the life of Saint Hieronymus Vagina and Saint Nicholas of Athens. There was, I remember with Saint Nicholas of Athens, what was it? They threatened to arrest him quite a few times for refusing to use the papal calendar. Yeah, and with Saint Hieronymus Vagina, they tried something as well, didn't they?
Yeah, Saint Hieronymus was well known for, even though he dealt with internal persecution, even where some of the monasteries under him would go to the new calendar, he stayed faithful to the tradition of the church. So yeah, absolutely, we do see that. It's actually quite common. One of the go ahead.
There was some echo or something. I didn't say anything.
Oh no, I was just asking. All right. Well, I've got you on the screen, so let's bring. Did you have any other questions right now or comments, like as we add more people?
The only comment I really have is, this is for like the audience, I suppose, is you read about some of the things that they did to the true Orthodox in Greece. There's stuff out there. If you go on the GOCK website, you can find some stuff that's kind of like what you did with the blog spot. You can auto-translate of it. They have some specific stories on there. There's one in particular for anyone that wishes to go looking for it about St. Anthony the Great and how he appeared to, I think it might have actually been the same Father Arsenios that you talked about. I'm pretty sure it was the same Father Arsenios because they mentioned the old barracks.
Well, make sure to link any of these if you have them handy in the chat, so they should pop up. If they don't pop up, put it in the private chat, and I'll link them in the chat.
I'm kind of tech illiterate, so I might have to link it later. But
okay.
The other thing that I'd like to point out to people, because what we're talking about with the persecution in the 20s, that was nothing. You can find this from like the Orthodox Tradition channel. They talk about it, and the life of Elder Theodogatos, and some of the other videos on there. The real persecution that they did, this might be a good stream for your father to do a later time, was the one in the 50s, the one that they called the Great Persecution.
Yeah, the one under Spiridon
bad.
Vlachos. I really wanted to touch on that today, but I realized I had lost the early history, so I found myself playing catch up. But if I have to do a part 2 of this just for the reign of Spiridon Vlachos, I will. Absolutely, and I may do that soon, simply because that was even more violent than this one.
It was awful. I think that people don't really realize that there was all these Freemasons that were in the Greek government. Obviously, you mentioned Venizelos, who was a Freemason, horrible persecutor of the church. I mean, as we know, Meletios Metaxas was a Freemason, a 33rd degree elder. The Freemason influence in the Greek government at that time, and the similarities, as I mentioned, with like St. Horambos, with how they threw him in a mental hospital, like how they did in the Soviet Union with so many people. The amounts of correlation, the similarity between like communism and Freemasonry when it came to dealing with Orthodox Christianity, it cannot be denied. And as you see in Russia today, there's still all sorts of communist forces around. I don't think
absolutely.
people will downplay the amount of Freemasonry is in the New Counters Church today, or at least influence of Freemasonry. I have a person who has personally told me that they're promoting Freemasonry within Go-Work churches even today. I guess I'll leave you with that.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we tend to forget, because we tend to always look at the more occult connections with Freemasonry, but one thing to remember is that Freemasonry is in some ways considered to be a symbol of modern Western Europe. It is tied to the foundation of the United States. So even if we put aside all the occult stuff, there were still people willing to welcome this under the guise of Western influence because they wanted to be more like the West. So this is one thing to keep in mind, that while we can look at even the occult aspects of Freemasonry, etc., the way people are seeing it, even in like the Western or the WEF agenda, the modern agenda, all these things are tied together, and we can see that. But for them, it's just like, ooh, new benefits we're getting, and they don't realize just the evil that comes out of it. It's terrifying. But thank you for your comments. You're welcome to stay on as I add the next person to the stream. We're going to be adding Aaron Sassana, if I said that right. Are you there, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm your father.
Okay, great. And what are your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns?
One thought, and then one, I guess, observation I've made since being able to interact with the GOC in general. One, what is it that you and Bishop Enoch say at the beginning of every stream? It's in, I'm assuming, Latin.
Okay. Yeah. If you know anything about the autonomous metropole, you know that we've always had Western rights. And so benedicite is Latin for bless, much like the Greek evlogite or like the Russian blagoslovit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. I don't know any languages besides English.
And bless is fine. Most people just say Father bless or bless. That's okay too. In any case, I'm glad you asked that question. We do say that, and I guess it is more obscure than we realize sometimes. We get kind of used to just kind of, I guess, people that already know us, and that's not necessarily the smartest tactic. I saw in the chat somebody had asked where Bishop Enoch is, and whether, I know it's not altogether obvious, even though it may be becoming more obvious to some, but True Orthodoxy is experiencing at least some level of growth right now. Especially it started probably the end of last year, the beginning of this year. I guess with maybe it's partially because of COVID, partially because of other things, because that even the reception there was mixed among the True Orthodox. But the more important thing is that as we reach out to more people, some things that may look obscure or strange to us, we're more than willing to explain. But getting back to Bishop Enoch, because I still don't see him yet in the chat, frankly, he's busy. He's a lot busier than he was last year. So I operate now under the assumption he may not make it, just because he is a bishop. He's the assistant to the Metropolitan, and people get busy. So I kind of accept that. But did you have any other questions? Or
I guess it is kind of a question.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know me pretty well because we talk on Gal a lot. Slight backstory. I've been trying to go from being in the new Calendarist church to being in the old Calendarist church, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've noticed with trying to actually get in touch with the two GOC churches that are around me is they don't like to get back to you ever.
That's odd. Usually, I mean, it could be a busy priest, but I mean, two churches in a row.
I've tried phone calls and emails from the contact information that the GOC has on their website. So,
just out of curiosity, what churches are those? Because I know there's a couple of GOCK parishes that are kind of notorious for that.
I would have to pull up both of the names.
Do you know if they're native Greek parishes? Maybe like the priest just doesn't feel comfortable calling back because he doesn't speak much English or anything. Or
both of the names for the contact information are both Greek.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't. There's lots of Greeks who speak perfect English.
Yeah, well, no, I mean the first and last name are both Greek. Okay. So I don't know if it's people from over there coming here or if they've been here a while.
Yeah, that's hard to tell because even ecclesial names usually use the traditional lingual form. Yeah, Wasna says, and he points this out, and we're going to bring him up next. He does say you might need to show up in person. Unfortunately, that is also true. Sometimes priests can get busy with their parishes and then just be like, I don't know who that is, and just click on the next message. So
yeah,
that's unfortunate. That's not. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it's human.
Yes. No. Well, the bad part is one of them they don't have an address listed, so I can't show up to that one. That one's a mission specifically, so I assume I'm probably meeting at someone's house.
I would probably, in that case, honestly, I would probably contact, if it's a GOC Kalinikos church, I would probably contact the monastery, the St. John Monastery, where the bishop resides, because sometimes monasteries, not sometimes, 99% of the times, act as kind of ecclesiastical centers where the other churches kind of glom around, and so they might have more up-to-date information.
Okay, I will do that.
All right. Well, we're going to bring on Wasna now, and then we are going to start going. Well, we're going to see Wasna. You're there?
Yes.
Okay, great. We're going to go through your question. Then we're going to go through if there's general discussion. Then we're going to go through all of the chats and stuff and see if there's more questions and comments. And we're going to keep on going.
Yeah. So I do have a question. It mainly has to do with not just the true Orthodox in Greece during that time period, you know, when they first introduced the calendar change in 1920, but also like what was happening like around the Orthodox world around the same time period.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like reading like Archbishop of Urki of Jordanville and other ROCOR figures that there was a belief, and I don't know if any other saints write about this, but that after the Tsar fell, that something wasn't only unleashed on Russia, but it was unleashed on the entire world because the Tsar was the last thing holding back what we would call the spirit of Antichrist. So is there like any correlation to what was happening in Greece around that time period, and then also what was happening in Russia at the same time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. These things are not they're not coincidental. When we tend to kind of at times over spiritualize the Tsar as the one who restraineth. We have to remember he was the head of the last large great Orthodox empire. Effectively, Russia kind of helped take care of the rest of Orthodoxy throughout the world. So not just in a symbolic and a spiritual sense, was the one who restrains killed, but also he was restraining in a real sense and trying to keep things in order throughout the Orthodox world. So the kind of demon of chaos was kind of unleashed on the world, for lack of a better term, because of the fact that there was no one to stop it. And in fact, in the Orthodox world, we would discover, and we can say thanks through the influence of Freemasonry, thanks through the influence of, eventually ecumenism and modernism, there were people willing to accept it. And so this is something that absolutely, it's does it mean like the restoration of the Tsar will bring everything back together? There's no way to tell that. There's no way to know, because we don't know what that is going to look like.
Well, even the restoration of the Tsar, isn't that prophecy? I think it was, if I remember correctly, Saint Seraphim of Sarab. Isn't that prophecy really dependent on, especially the deep repentance of Russia, but also all of us as well?
What I've seen in some prophecies is that they're kind of two-tiered, which is that if the Tsar returns and the people repent, Russia will become smaller, but will stay the end of the Antichrist. If the Tsar does not return and there's no repentance, the end will come faster. Things like that. And so let me see here. So did you have any other questions before we go to comments and start going through them?
No, I mean, that was my main question.
Right.
Kind of like a question, but also like a point, because I know like when people read, like, especially like World Orthodox, like Russia's Catacomb Saints.
Yeah.
I know what helped me, speaking from experience, kind of like connect the dots with this thing, was the learning about the specifically the persecution of the true Orthodox in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, like you said, when you read the details and the accounts and the historical data, like it's just, even like when you read like the lives of the saints, in the past 2,000 years, that it's just a consistent trend that the those that are in heresy and schism always persecute those who are confessing the faith, always.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but yeah, I'm good. That's everything basically.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go through some of the comments because there's a lot going on here. So we're gonna go right up to the top to when I left to go get some water, and let's see what I can find here. And this Sava asks Aaron. I was thinking about the waited. Okay, you're both on the screen, so I guess that's kind of weird. Maximus, thank you. Can we get elevator music? I thought I did. Anyway, let's see here, and I'm going to try to get a slightly better setup in terms of the music. It's just I wanted to do that because I knew that this would be an issue. Smetana, one of the good things I remember from college. Who does not remember smetana? Smetana, for those who don't know, is unpasteurized sour cream, and it goes on top of things like pelmeni and can also be used in desserts. Fantastic stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and let me see here. Watch out with the ice cream. We end up like me, Theo. Okay. Chris Dabrowski, the over 50-year-long siege of Esfigmenou would be good to talk about. Wow, that could actually deserve its own show. I'm going to be honest with you. For those who are not totally familiar with what he is talking about, let me see if I can pull up the best site on the matter, which will get you down on the rabbit hole. And that is, if I can find it, give me one moment, because that is the Friends of Esfigmenou website in the U.S. Let me see here. It's kind of an older style website, but I am going to put that in the link. Esfigmenou is one of the 19 self-governing monasteries on Mount Athos, and it is the only one, and actually, in some ways, the largest one that exists because it acts as we've explained on the show before. At one point, the entire Holy Mountain was on the side of the true Orthodox. But over time, through the intrigues of the ecumenical patriarchs replacing abbots, etc., monastery by monastery began to fall off to where we have Esfigmenou and a number of isolated skeets who basically resist Patriarch Bartholomew. Since the 1980s, however, the Patriarch has gone for a slightly different tack, since they've kind of barricaded themselves, and that is to assert more legal ownership. So effectively, he's become Earth's worst landlord. He's shut off their electricity. He's placed a blockade on their goods. He has made it impossible for them to do commerce outside of hand-to-hand manual commerce with other monks on the monastery. Effectively, he's kind of really limited them. They've learned to get around it. Keep in mind, their monasteries on Mount Athos, they're pretty self-governing, so they can grow their own foods. They can do all sorts of things like that. One monk was killed something like 10 years ago when he tried to cross into one of their own orchards, and some ecumenical patriarch and security force shot him. So they're, the point is, even under persecution, they're surviving. But the reason why sfigmeno.com is so handy is because Friends of Esfigmeno is a group that extends from the U.S. to Greece. They have direct contacts with the monastery. They also have a website in Greek, Friends of Esfigmeno. They're on Facebook and a number of other places where you can get support to the monks. You can learn more about their plight, and even if you make it to Mount Athos and you want to visit, it's difficult but not impossible to do anymore. So yeah, there's a lot there. I will say that one of the fun byproducts of the Esfigmeno struggle in modern Orthodoxy is that the monks of Mount Athos held up a flag that said Orthodoxy or death. And this flag there was a bastardized version of it in Russia, which has skulls and swords and stuff like that. But the point is that, give me just a moment. Let me see if I can put this on the screen to see how familiar this looks to you. But the point is that that became a symbol of counterculture in apparently in Orthodoxy today. That this flag, which is hung over as a banner over, used to be all the monasteries of Mount Athos, but now it's over Esfigmeno and over some confessing skeets, defending the traditional Orthodox Church, defending the true Orthodox, defending the true calendar, and now people wear it as a T-shirt. So,
but that's actually where that comes from, because I have seen that before.
Yes, lots of people love it. It literally comes from the true Orthodox confessing the faith. Yes, that's exactly what it comes from.
Of course.
Yeah. Surprise.
It's turned into a T-shirt.
I see Wazna disappeared. You're welcome back if you make it. All right, let's continue on the comments. And sfigmeno.com if you want to see what you can do to support them and help them out. Again, live call-ins are available. We are doing this as long as we can, and if it continues to 11, that's where we're going to cut it off. So let's see here. Let's see where we're going to. Okay, that's not really for me, I don't think. Okay.
Oh, Father, on the Esfagmenu thing, if I may. For anyone that's interested in it, if you just look up Esfagmenu Monastery on YouTube, there's probably 2 videos you'll find there. One of them is a video of the Greek police or whatever, the EP's paramilitary. That's a real thing. If you look it up, it's a real thing. Breaking down the door with a sledgehammer and assaulting the monks. That's one of the videos you can find. The other video is a video that's the abbot, where he had to drive in the middle of the night in this little souped up SUV and had to avoid guard posts.
Yep.
So it's pretty bad. I mean, you look at that and it looks like something from a war zone, but no, that's just
they're
Greece.
Under siege. Yeah, they're under siege in Mount Athos. When I say under siege, people go into shock that I'm saying that. But yes, they're literally in a state of siege and have been for decades on Mount Athos. So yeah,
they have the Coast Guard out there with machine guns. They're threatening to shoot down boats for going in there and giving them food. It's way worse than people really think it is.
Well, it's way worse when we think of it in an official sense. Now, keep in mind, there are workarounds. They don't talk about them much, but that's why I suggest if you want to support them, contacting Friends of Esfigmeno, because there are clandestine ways to help. And I'm not going to talk about them. I'm not going to talk about what I know about them because there's no productive reason to do that. If you contact the Friends of SV Venue, they can help with support, food support, etc. There are ways, and this is something I discovered with catacomnics in Russia when I first met them, the older people, that there are ways. you don't talk about it, you find ways around it, and you continue to survive. It's not don't become hopeless or think that it's a Sally Struthers situation or anything like that, like adopt a monk for $3 a month or anything. It's not. It's they're in a state of siege, but they're also in a state of survival. So be hopeful. Again, anyone who wants to jump in, feel free. The link is on the top there. Let me see here. I think I answered Wazda with where Bishop Enoch is. Just hard to reach sometimes. God willing, he can come in sometime tonight. But if not, he may have been out all day doing things and he's asleep. It could be anything. Or he could be out doing things right now. Does anyone remember the Greek True Orthodox Archbishop Averki of Jordanville came across at the bus station? I want to say that that's Bishop Petros of Astoria, along with Akakios Papas, but I don't remember. I think Vladika Petros was one of them. Yeah, he was definitely one of them. Jonathan Britt says, I am so not ready for the Dormition fast. Yeah, no, I can understand that. But on the plus side, it is only a 2-week fast, so it's not too bad. Just think of it like, it's for the Theotokos, and just think, if you were a new calendarist, it would be worse because your church would be covered in stakes. So, let me see here. And that was, that was Metropolitan Petros. Jonathan Britt asks, are there any measures that either the ROAC or GOC take to prevent subversion in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, like how Metaxakis did? I think that in terms of, it's one of those things where it's kind of a size differential thing, and because when you're just talking about the Synod of the EP, I mean, Metaxakis managed to narrowly escape deposition and even death a few times. He was driven almost by like a demonic force. In terms of the ROAC and the GOCK, I mean, frankly, there are enough kind of, I guess you could say there's enough of a gulf between, ROAC and the MP or the GOCK and the State Church of Greece that you'd have to cross a few barriers to get from one side to the other. Not even the least of which are ideological, like ecumenism and Sergianism, before people would even regard you as trustworthy. So, I mean, I hate to say that, but they are different enough at this point that it's not so easy for one to just sneak in. It does still happen, especially among smaller groups, and cause problems, but the problems usually solve themselves. I know that may not be a satisfactory answer, but it's unfortunately when you're dealing with the issue of bureaucracy, which is what we're really talking about, we have to look at it practically. And it's, I would say it's harder than it used to be to kind of mess with them. Marxism is Gnostic, Masonry is not. Yeah, they're all kind of united. Yeah, kind of. Unfortunately, and that's they're all now just New World Order or whatever, the Great Reset. The names change. The what's the word I'm looking for? The despotism, and I don't mean it like in the best way, stays the same. The truth, it'll grow even more coming 2025. Yes, it will. It will actually. I am remaining positive that Nicaea 2025 will return all churches to Orthodoxy. One can hope. We have talked about that, and one thing to keep in mind that I have pointed out is that to some degree, union with the heterodox is already kind of a thing. It's certainly true with the Monophysites. Depending on your country, it's true with the Roman Catholics. Even though it's not formally stated, what I think happened, there was a book called Florence 2000 by Father Alexi Young. I feel now Father Monk Ambrose. I feel like I brought this up before, but the point is that everyone was thinking there would be this great Florence occurring in 2000, and that the Pope and the Patriarch would celebrate, and then everyone would understand that's the moment it was time to join with the other Orthodox, and that never happened. And I'm not convinced that that will happen in 2025 because, quite frankly, the ecumenists can't really expand past the walls of their churches. But have they managed to convert the people within the walls of their churches? Have they managed to convince them that at least the Roman Catholics, etc., are the same church? Sure, they might have, and they might not even have to do any more work on it. But ultimately, what that comes down to is that if no real change happens in 2025, then what? What are you waiting for? This is why I tell people, rather than wait till 2025, join the true Orthodox, and then if it gets better in 2025, you can work for unity. But it probably won't get better in 2025. What we have is what we have, and it's not bad, and it's quite a lot of people, millions of people, and hundreds of bishops. That's enough to work with, so we've got to work with it. Wasn't said email Father Stephen Allen, see if he can't get in touch with a bishop for you. That's not bad advice, and Jonathan Britt agrees with it.
I wanted to ask, who is that?
Yeah.
Father Stephen Allen, who is that? Because I don't know who that is. I've never heard of him.
Father Stephen Allen does a series on YouTube. I forget the name of it. I think it's like Orthodox Survival or Course or something. And
Orthodox Survival Course, yeah.
Yeah. It's a kind of, I think that was the name that Father Seraphim first came up with his tape lectures. But in any case, yeah. So that's, he kind of, he's known on YouTube, but I believe I want to say he's in Michigan or.
He's in a parish that's like 20 minutes north of Detroit.
Okay.
St. Irene Crisolados, I believe. And
is that in Michigan?
Yeah, it's in Michigan. It's like 20 minutes north
like
of
Clare Shores or something, right? So he's a pretty well-known English speaker, and he reaches out to people through outreach online all the time. So that's probably why he was recommended. And he could probably help find stuff. And let me see here. We got 3 ROAC people here. Yeah, well, we've got a few different kinds of people. Let me see here. And Jonathan Britt asks, can I get a quick rundown on this Nicaea 2025? Yeah, you're right. It is WCC Antichrist shenanigans. But what everyone's expecting is the magical concelebration between the Pope and Patriarch, where like everyone's gonna flee the temples and stuff. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. What it's gonna look like is more likely like a CZ 1983. And yeah, some people joined the True Orthodox, but was it the massive moment where all of World Orthodoxy realized, hey, maybe we're in the wrong place? It wasn't. And so don't have too high expectations for what's going to happen. I hope so. I hope more people become True Orthodox, but I don't think it. I think they're not. They're ecumenists, but they're not stupid, and they're not going to do anything that destroys themselves. Santa Irene is near Detroit, and also we're mentioned Wholesale, Michigan. Okay, very good. But yeah, Aaron, I think you did. Was it Aaron who mentioned the South? There's a lot to work with. We have a new monk in North Florida who is still just getting kind of his feet wet to open up kind of a mission. And so I think that, there's going to be more opening. Don't be surprised. But again, it's we're just you never know what's going to happen. I'll put it that way. Okay. Now, did either of you have other questions? Or again, if anyone wants to pop on, the live stream link is available in blue. So feel free. We are here. We were talking about the crimes of the Greek and Calendarists against the Orthodox, which was correctly pointed out. Those crimes are still going on against Esfigmenu. And they're not the only ones. But
sorry.
No, please go ahead.
To keep it on the subject of the crimes of the new calendarists, after the 1960s or whatnot, I don't really know too much. Esfigmenu that's like you said, it's probably deserving of its own episode altogether.
Absolutely.
I just heard whispers and rumors and stuff. Well, not really rumors; they're all confirmed, but I don't know too much. I'm sure there's way more out there in Greek. I'm sure. What was it? You might know more about this, Father Deacon, than I do, but what was it, like in 2011 or something? The Greek version of the Supreme Court, it might just be called the Supreme Court of Alienos or whatnot, they ruled that the laws that existed that basically said that the old calendarists were not Orthodox or unconstitutional, and they said something along the lines of you can't actually say the true Orthodox aren't Orthodox, because I know, for example, like you mentioned, the Greek Constitution, it said something along the lines in there, or they had provisions that they created there in the 20s and made it to where, it was probably the 50s. I'm trying to remember stuff freehand, which is difficult, especially now as many concussions as I had. But it was something about how they made it to where basically only the EP or the state church could legally do processions in the streets in the cities, and they could only legally, publish Bibles through the EP Bible Society or something. And they eventually ruled that unconstitutional in Greece only in like 2011, 2014.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like they've been trying stuff like that for the better part of 50 years. A lot of it calmed down with the Mars Hill case in 1982. But it kind of reopened itself. And what I mean by that is the Mars Hill case in 1982, basically, remember that priests in Greece were considered state employees, so they could get health care and a salary. But mostly the biggest concern was health care for the elderly priests. Up until 1982, true Orthodox priests could not get that. And that was changed in 82 when they were recognized that the true Orthodox are not a schism or a new religion, but are just Orthodox Christians. Since then, the EP's not done, and so they've been trying to kind of get their stamp of approval on everything. The Archbishop of Athens, new calendar, no different. They're also doing the same thing. And so it's had varying degrees of success. Most recently, there was an attempt to say that the church in Greece was the new calendar church. And so any other religious group that was not part of them had to register as a separate religion. This became a bit of a controversy, especially about 10 years ago, because some of the synods, such as the GOC under Archbishop Politicos, registered as separate bodies. This is actually important because you see, people felt like they were saying, so you're saying you're not the Church of Greece. No, but they weren't. But as the legally constituted body, according to what the Greeks were saying now, it seemed that way. But then there was the case with the Matthewites, for example, with Archbishop Stephanos. Because he refused to sign on to creating a new body, etc., at first, this gave the new calendar hierarchs attempts to sue for his buildings. Because they could say, well, if you're claiming to be part of our church, then we have the right to your buildings. So there's ugly legal ramifications to the whole thing. And honestly, as much as I can refer to the canons, etc., I'm not an actual lawyer in Greece, but that would be a very interesting discussion to have because of these weird legal questions that have been created by these shenanigans that are being pulled by the EP and the Archbishop of Athens new calendar. Yeah, it would absolutely be an interesting thing, but yeah, so yeah,
Actually, I learned this. Oh, sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Please. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry, couldn't hear you. I know, like, you brought this up, actually. The only reason why it's called the genuine Orthodox Christians of Greece is because they couldn't legally just call themselves Orthodox Christians. They had to put something in front of it.
Right.
There's all sorts of just legal, I don't even really know how to put it, just legal, tons and tons of legalese and all that, just basically created to just persecute Orthodox Christianity in a legal manner.
And unfortunately, that's something we've seen now with the COVID protocols that they're going worldwide on, and so it's something where you kind of have to you don't always have to be in continual retreat, but you have to understand what your standing is vis-a-vis the government that cares for you allegedly. In Russia, there's no such confidence. Frankly, I think that the overwhelming majority of regular Russian people don't care about the government, but those who actually care about Russia and who care about the church are sometimes a little bit more. I don't want to say that they're hostile to it, but they don't trust it because it's not a normative setup by any means. But yeah, it's an awful thing. Now, as to how that relates with Esphigmenou, that's interesting because they actually created, I believe, in around the same time, some parallel brotherhood. So they managed to use the Greek police to take one part of the compound. It's a smaller part. It's where the mailbox is, if I remember correctly. And then they declared themselves the Brotherhood of Esphigmenou there, but they're just basically New Calendar sympathizers who are pretending to be the Esphigmenou Brotherhood. So you'll even see in World Orthodoxy, you'll see eventually some of them started listing it as Neo-Esphigmenou because they couldn't bear the fiction of saying they're Esphigmenou when you could clearly see the giant monastery with the black flags on top from the naked eye. So the point is that they're even trying that in the hope of legally trying to cause a problem, etc.
Well, you know about how with Esfagmino in particular, the EP in like 1990 something, officially they went through the Greek courts and they redesignated the old Esfagmino Brotherhood, and it's called Esfagmino, the real one. They designated it as a papist monastery.
Yep.
They reclassified it from Orthodox to papist, so they could say, "Oh, well, see, we can actually bring a New Calendarist Brotherhood in there because it's not an Orthodox monastery. We have legal right to do that."
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. When you're talking about the law in Greece, I mean, keep in mind that Greece, acting as the heir of the Roman Empire, I mean, these are the successors of the founders of codified law as we understand it when we think about the law of Justinian. Adding to that another 1,500 years of legal proceedings, and yeah, you're looking at some very interesting legal cases. As I said, I would love to interview a lawyer in Greece on this sort of thing because they would probably have really interesting opinions on some of it. Okay. So, go ahead.
No, sorry, I thought my phone died again because I just stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. I was like, "Oh, my phone."
I was taking a sip of some water.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Sorry. But yeah, with the Freemasonry, I was talking about that earlier. I didn't get a chance to bring it up, but this is pretty well known. You can look up the Freemasons had a lot to do with the Greek Revolution. They put themselves in there, and from
every revolution, really.
Yeah, but from like 1821 especially, all these British Freemasons started traveling to Greece, and they established lots of strange stuff there. Of course, we could talk about Hellenism. We could talk about all that. Speaking of Freemasons, Mletos Metaxis, I can't actually recall where I read this from.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in some sort of tract that was put out by either Hockna or Old Rocor. I have no idea, to be quite honest, but it was something about Mletos Metaxis. And of course, you know about the story. I think you mentioned it earlier in the stream. I'm sorry if you didn't. I'm trying to do like 14 things at once now. But of course, came the Patriarch of Constantinople. Then he went to Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is that the people of Alexandria wouldn't even let him get off the ship. They were throwing tomatoes at him on the ship, not allowing him to come to port. And as he was dying there in 1937, it was awful illness. It was a horrible illness. And I remember in this thing I read, it said something along the lines of like the doctors and the nurses that are there that watched him in agony at the end of his life. One of them said something along the lines of, "Well, that's the best reason I've seen to become an old calendarist right there."
Yeah, I never heard that story, but it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, he caused damage everywhere he went, and it's an awful shame. He kind of set up the kind of power hierarchy that we have in World Orthodoxy in America today, having basically moved the Greek Archdiocese under the direct jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople, which meant that all the American support, all the American money, etc., would be going directly to there. So yeah, it is definitely interesting to look at that. I mean, Freemasonry, as we know, was part of the founding of this country. It was part of the founding of virtually every country on the American continents, whether north or south, as well as throughout Europe. It acted as a revolutionary force, but oftentimes it was really just part of the British Crown. It was just considered like their kind of they're Jesuits, for lack of a better term. But other than that, let me see here. Are there any other questions or comments? I don't see anything here.
Do you think it's possible that Freemasonry is going to end up playing a part in the religion of the Antichrist, Father?
You see, the problem is that ultimately Freemasonry is just a manifestation of occultism that existed previously to it. Especially when you're dealing with Hermetic groups. Some of them like to claim their history goes back to the Knights Templar, etc. The point is that this kind of movement is just taking on other forms. I would say that while, say for example, we look at like the World Economic Forum, many of their trappings are almost Freemasonic. Are all of them members? I would say that probably the higher ones are, but they don't take it very seriously. And I think that a lot of the Freemasons in America, say for example today, or even in Europe, mostly it's a social thing. And so you end up becoming, for lack of a better word, part of these dark elites even before you formally become a Freemason. So I wouldn't say that it's like the Freemasons are in charge. I would just say that there's a bunch of people who are always devoted to evil and control, and they take on different forms. Freemasonry was probably the most visible of those for the past 300 years. And I mean, I'm not a Freemason. I can't speak to their current influence. I don't know. Maybe all of the left is Freemasonic. I have no idea. What I do know is that this alchemist class, as I often refer to it, this group that believes that they're going to perfect man and control man and effectively turn man into gods, where they will be the gods over what little few people are left, if any. Their mission never really changes. The concept of depopulation now is almost 100 years. Well, it is 100 years old. Eugenics is 100 years old. I mean, a lot of these things that are proposed now are old ideas that are only in vogue among this same group of people, whether or not they're all Freemasons or Weffites or whatever we want to call them, people who believe themselves to be masters of the world. And so I would say that it's possible. I haven't studied the links that carefully because I'm more of a look at the fruits kind of guy, and I see if some guy is saying, okay, you're going to eat bugs and you're not going to own anything, the first thing that goes through my head isn't let me check if he's a Freemason. It's how do we find and stop you? So that in that sense, is it related? Yes, it's related in a spiritual sense, but I haven't put those dots together or anything like that.
Okay. No, the only reason I asked was I don't know much about Freemasonry myself either. Apart from anything on like a stream that Michael Woodcock, Brother Augustine, has said. He was a former Freemason. Anything he said on the stream I've absorbed, but apart from that, I don't know anything about it. So I didn't know how, I guess for lack of a better term, compatible it would be able to actually be with anything else besides itself.
I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was my first real job, I considered when I was 16 in New York City, was for a telemarketing company, and the telemarketing company was in a building called Masonic Hall. And so I was when you walk in, there's this giant mural, and on the bottom it says "Famous Freemasons." And you see everyone listed from every major president to Abbott and Costello to Hollywood celebrities. And you realize that they're kind of all over the place. Where I live, there are a number of Freemasonic halls. Freemasonry is tied very much into the fabric of American culture, and I don't necessarily say that in a positive way. What I am saying is that in terms of proximate threats, it's difficult to know exactly how much is done by Freemasonry specifically or another one of these groups, because a lot of these groups are tied together. It's no coincidence, for example, that Jay-Z and Beyonce are both Freemasons or part of the female order. I think that's like I forget what they're, the Golden Dawn Sisters or whatever they're called. But the point is, but even that, like if you look, the Revolutionary Party in Greece is called Golden Dawn. That's an occult symbol by itself. Like, did nobody notice that? I mean, it's more, once you start looking at the symbolism, and I hate to quote this, but I do truly feel this a lot of the time, is signs and symbols rule the world as opposed to words and laws. And once you look into this stuff, even from just a textbook sense, like if you read like Manly Hall or something like that on his principles of Freemasonry, some of that stuff's straight up evil, but it will also sound perversely familiar, even if it's not stated to be Freemasonic. It's there in pop culture. It's everywhere, and it's pervasive, particularly in Western societies. And in this, I unfortunately have to include Russia, more than people realize. I will say that. So if you want to understand a bit of who rules, you look at the symbolism and who coined it.
Well, you mentioned the Golden Dawn. That's Aleister Crowley. That's not even Masonic. It's possibly worse, arguably worse.
Well, I would argue that these groups, if you follow their origins and you keep following each one's lines of origins, they all have common ancestors. So, granted, Crowley is not, as much as people look at him as like a creator, but he's not, he's really just following in a line from other people. And I mean, whether you're talking about the Bavarian Illuminati, etc., I mean, these groups all end up having common denominators. But one of the most clear features of them is this Gnostic perfectionism.
They all hold that, yeah.
Yeah, they all hold in the perfectibility of man on Earth, and that they're kind of in charge of it. And unfortunately, at its very core, that's no different than the mission of the World Economic Forum.
You see like Rosicrucians and Freemasons and Golden Dawn, and you can get into some of the really obscure stuff like OTO and what's that other one?
The perverted.
Some of the neo-Nazi ones. They all hold the same thing, At the end of the day, it's all kind of similar. It's like the different flavors of Marxist out there. Like, oh, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, I'm a Maoist. Well, they all kill people, and they all hate the church. So at the end of the day, it's not really that much different.
There's even softer versions of it when you think about it. Like, a lot of people don't even think about the Order of Moose, but that was kind of parodied in the Flintstones. But and that supposedly just a harmless social club that just happens to have these little initiations and just happens to hold all their parties on Sundays during when church is supposed to be happening. Sometimes the most what's the word I'm looking for? The most obvious and subtle things that can be done are just keeping people away from God. There's one Masonic group not far from us that always does these Sunday barbecues, and it smells great. And you're thinking, well, that's so nice that they're just making barbecues and selling things for sale, until you realize it's Sunday morning throughout the afternoon. And even it's just tiny and subtle, but the whole point is it's all to keep you away from church. So even the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Pleasant things that they do sometimes have much more evil overtones than even they realize at the time.
Speaking about Freemasonry as well, just to bring this up, I always tell people when talking about the new calendarists and all that, it's when you look at, especially this ties into Freemasonry as well, if you look at the Metropolitan Dorotheos guy, he was the one that was one of the signers of the encyclical in 1920. He was Meletios' partner in crime, essentially. You read some of the stuff that guy was doing, it's like, okay, yeah, this guy was clearly not serving the church. The most infamous case is when he took his panagia, which only an Orthodox bishop is allowed to wear, and he gave it to an Anglican priest. He just gave it to an Anglican priest and put it on him, and it's like, okay, this is something that this guy did in 1919, and this is one of the people that was very very involved in getting Meletios appointed as patriarch. One of the people that's very much involved in the calendar change in 1924. And you start looking at some of these people, and it's like, it wasn't. You can't really look at these people and be like, okay, these people they were just under the best intentions where they thought the new calendar was a good idea. Like, it really wasn't. Then when you understand these people were all Freemasons, as Metropolitan Dorotheos was a Freemason, it's like, okay, they were actively trying to persecute the church. What followed next with the murders and the imprisonments and all this other stuff, I mean, there's a reason why people at first are like, okay, we don't want anything to do with this, because they knew that was coming. There's really no question about that. You know, when you see, okay, all these Freemasons are running around, hanging out with Anglicans and every flavor of heretic, and I mean, like Meletios Metadoxes, it was known while he was Patriarch of Constantinople that he was a Freemason. They were talking about it in the newspapers at the time, like, oh, by the way, this guy's a Freemason, and he's the Patriarch of Constantinople.
Oh, let me ask you a question. What is the central idea behind Freemasonry, if we may? Because, I mean, we could get even further and even uglier in it if we want to, and we may as well.
Hold up, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Audio is terrible.
Sure.
I think I might fix it. Also, I'm sorry, I know there's tons of back on my microphone. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, with Freemasonry, a lot of it's Gnosticism, so it's this whole idea, as I see it, as, oh, man can save himself. Man can perfect himself. Man can save himself. Such a neat little idea.
Well, what I mean is that Freemasonry claims to have an origin, and what do they claim their origin is? Are you familiar with that? I
know they claim that the righteous Solomon is their first founder. I know that's one of the claims that they make.
In other words, that their craft comes from Solomon, or more properly, the builders of the temple.
Yes.
And so when we think about that, there are devoted groups that exist throughout the world devoted to rebuilding the temple in Israel. And so it kind of ties into that as well. Unfortunately, even you could take the Zionist movement, which often referred to Freemasons as dupes. The point is that, you know, there's even another level to it that we're not even discussing. But yeah, all of it ties into geopolitics. Go ahead.
Is it just Gentile Kabbalism?
Basically.
They follow Kabbalah, Hermetic alchemy. It's a lot of pagan, Jewish. It's all over the place with that stuff. I wasn't a Freemason. I just know about a lot of this stuff because being obsessed with conspiracy theories for years, you hear about Freemasons, and I was like, oh, I want to study these people. Studying these people, I was like, okay, actually, these people are pretty nasty. I mean, their beliefs are. I'm not saying anything personally about Freemasons. It'd be a great stream if you were allowed to do it. If you could make a live stream just about Freemasonry and whatnot, but YouTube wouldn't allow that.
Yeah, I feel like it would be kind of also kind of distracting because we're kind of, if I was to put it, I'd say that the world is kind of in a late, so we're in a stage of, to use the terms that I found common now, we're in a stage of peak occultism. And what I mean by that is that all the plans are now becoming much more open and clear as to what they want to do. So at this point, the only response properly is open conflict. Ultimately, once they're talking about taking away people's food sources and land, that's when you have to take a stand and fight back.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, they've made occultism a child's toy. You can go into any store and buy a pair of tarot cards and a Ouija board now.
Exactly. Absolutely. There was actually a story in Peru about a mass hospitalization of kids who did that, and then apparently they ended up all going nuts, and they ended up having to hospitalize 30 kids.
I didn't hear this. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. But in any case, ultimately we have to take advantage of the tools that we have. And the biggest tool that we have right now is access to worldwide information. What was something that was only available to small networks, like people like, whether the Freemasons or other occult groups, they could pass on information to each other much more quickly than the world at large could. And most people only saw the world in terms of the world next door. In this, the controlled media institutions actually had more power. But we have abilities to go past that now. And we can see things in terms of the whole playing field and what the plan really is. And so even when I say the plan, everyone kind of knows what that means, in terms of what they want to do to us and how we can stop it.
Just mentioning Crowley again, with like what you said with how occultism is just so out there. It's everywhere now, like I found out about Aleister Crowley like probably 10 years ago. I probably heard about him for the first time. I said, okay, this guy sounds strange. I think I ordered one of his books or I found one in a library or something. I read it, it's like, okay, this guy was just like nuts, But I didn't realize, like I thought at the time, like, oh, this is just some obscure guy. I mean, he was mentioned in that one song, what was it, Black Sabbath or something, which was talking of occultism or a name. What was that, Aaron?
I was just thinking about that song, Mr. Crowley by Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh, shit, yeah. I forgot about that one. I hate to say this, but if you go into certain subcultures musically, I mean, he's all over the place. All of them.
It's Hollywood. Like all the Hollywood people know about Crowley. Like there was like some actor who even said something like, "Oh, Aleister Crowley is my biggest influence." Like I thought this was some obscure guy I heard about. It's like, okay, dude's a heroin addict. He talks about how he can summon demons. It's like, okay, no one knows about this dude. And then it's like, oh wait, all the right people know about him. All the people in Hollywood, all the people in the music industry, and it's like, oh, that's
well. I mean, I hate to point to it like there's it's signs and symbols ruling the world, but like that's kind of, how do I put this? That's kind of the edge, for lack of a better word, the Overton window of evil. That's kind of the edge, and it moves in the center. But people ignore things like the fact that many people believe the Beatles were Satanists. There's whole books about that. And that's considered, mainstream pop Americana. It's the point I'm trying to make is that if we start looking at it, we start realizing that even our pop analyses or popular analyses of things are actually already seeded with messages that we're not even paying attention to. Why is it that everybody avoids the term communism? I don't know if you've noticed this, but whether you're on the left or the right politically, to refer to your enemy, you refer to them as a fascist. Well, that's interesting, considering that many people are openly acting like communists. But we don't say communist. We call the other guy a fascist, and we're not a fascist. And the truth of the matter is, I know I'm opening something. I'm not going to take it to its conclusion because I don't want the stream to get destroyed. But the point is that we're not allowed to pick certain things. It's okay to say Crowley's evil, but it's not okay to say John Lennon's evil. It's okay to say that Soviets are, Nazis are bad, but Soviets, even though they killed 10 times more, are not bad. Just doing what they had to. Do you get what I'm saying? In other words, that even the language that people are using now is already so heavily loaded that people can't see the messages that they're passing on or that they're holding to.
Oh yeah, no, that's a story about that actually, with not wanting to use specific words and condemn certain groups. The New Calendar Church that I go to, one of the guys that was in the catechetical class with me was an open communist.
Oh.
And the priest was like, no, that's fine.
And,
that's not good.
But it's actually more common than you think, though. The point
that was the sad part, is that I could tell that, like, oh no, this happens a lot, which is terrifying.
Yeah, unfortunately true. But the problem is that the only way to get past this is to really understand what people mean in the now and take it apart and look at what those symbols that they're using mean and find the answer underneath. And that is unfortunately, I think the funniest example of this is the popularization of the movie The Da Vinci Code. And the reason I find this funny is because I'm sure both of you know the film. It's blasphemous, blah, blah, blah.
I've never seen it. I've managed to avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, I know it from synopses. I've read a few things. I've seen clips of it. I've never wanted to watch it. But here's why I never wanted to watch it. This is what people don't understand. It's not because it's evil. It's because it's incredibly stupid. And that seems self-evident, but I'm going to explain a little bit more. On the front page of the Da Vinci Code, every single copy says, based on a true story. So that's the first giant red flag. But the other and bigger one, and I've talked about symbols and how they relate to things. The study of symbols is referred to as it's a field of science called semiotics. If if you get into that, one of the biggest semioticians that existed was a writer named Umberto Eco, who wrote a book about the occult movement. You'd find this very interesting, Salo, but it's a thick book, but if you know the lingo, it goes a lot faster. The point is, the entire book is ultimately about symbols and dealing with the occult. The plot is ridiculous and actually hilarious when you get through it. But the whole point is that many people, years later, when the Da Vinci Code came out, would refer to the book I'm referring to, Foucault's Pendulum, as a thinking man's Da Vinci Code, which actually insulted the author because from his perspective, and he actually said this, he said, Dan Brown is one of my creatures. He was referring to the author of the Da Vinci Code. He saw him as a character in his book, and he's not wrong. But just to get to the point of why this is all kind of stupid, in the book, the main character in the Da Vinci Code is somebody who is a professor of symbology. Symbology as a word did not exist before the Da Vinci Code. It's a dumbed-down version of semiotics, so you'll never actually learn semiotics. You'll just look for something called symbology, which isn't real. And so the point is, it's an exercise in the stupefaction of society. And I hate to say this, but that book was popular in Russia. I saw lots of people reading the Da Vinci Code in translation, Code Da Vinci. But the point is, it was ridiculous because it just showed how willing the populace is to grab onto even the most obvious occult meanings of things and miss everything that's going on underneath. They're following a mirage, ultimately.
Trying to tie this back to trying to tie this back to the original topic, which was the crimes of the new calendarists. I just remembered some more stuff.
We're at 10:15 at this point. It's free for all, so it's fine. We don't have to tie it back to anything. If anyone has any questions, comments, they want to just throw something out there, please feel free. I'm surprised no one's brought up Metropolitan Evlogius yet. We're actually going to do a paper on that, but in any case, so.
I was mentioning earlier saints and whatnot, like Saint Hieronymus of Jena, Saint Nicholas of Athens. I was reminded of a few people that were there in Greece, like of Blessed Joachim.
Okay.
What's that?
Blessed Joachim. I'm not sure. I need the context.
He was an abbot at the St. Anne's Skeet. He was a new he fought against new calendarism. He was an old calendarist. They called him a zealot. He was the one whose beard started growing supernaturally. He was there's both the Demetrius of the GOCK knew him, met him near the end of his life here on this earth, and they've locally canonized him in Greece. Locally glorified him. His relics, they say, are incorrupt, and I know there's a story he was mentioned in one of those videos on the Orthodox Tradition channel where they talked about some of the miracles associated with him. But I know I've seen some stuff out there that talks about how he was brutally persecuted by the new calendarists in the 1930s. They beat him, they shaved him. I mean, if you the Greek Orthodox television channel, the Greek Orthodox Christian TV, whatever it's called, they have videos that talk about some of the other monks and priests there in the 30s. In the 30s, it was pretty bad. I mean, most of the time people think of the 20s or the 1950s, but they did some awful stuff to the old counters basically all the time. There was also Saint Clemis of Gardakan, who was considered a new confessor. He knew Saint Chrysostom of Farina, I believe. If you just read what they did to Saint Chrysostom of Farina, it's yeah, and these are from the people that are saying that we're, like you said earlier, joking, say, oh yeah, we're schismatic. That's okay to kill schismatics, according to the new counters anyway.
I hate to point out, bring it back to COVID, but there were people on Twitter calling for unvaccinated people to die. So I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but yeah, what we're seeing now is we're seeing kind of what they saw in its earliest form in local government turning evil, for lack of a better word, and we're seeing that in real time all over us. And it's the question is, what do you do about it? I know that I personally will not. I can't see myself joining the thing that they want us to join. I don't see a reason for it.
He was
but
on
yeah.
here earlier, but Theodore, or Wozna, as he goes by on the internet, he said something along the lines to me once. I was like, your schismatic isn't really a point when you just kill us. Like to the new counter say, oh, you're schismatic. It's like, that's not really a point when we've had guns put to us, we've been killed, we've been murdered, we've been tortured, we've been all this. It's not really a point after a while. It's like the equivalent, compare, as much as I hate to do so, to compare it to like secular talk. It's like when people just say, oh, you're racist. It's after a while it becomes like almost a non-point, because like, well, if we're so evil, if we're so bad, how doesn't justify what they're doing? No.
I think that and this is part of the reason why I chose the title as I did, as inflammatory as it could be, is because what I have come to realize from my perspective is that a lot of these people, a lot of them genuinely believe that the struggle between the true Orthodox and new calendarists was like an academic dispute. Like they were kind of just sitting one day and they said, no, we're going to keep the old calendar. And the other side was like, no, we're going to keep the new calendar. And then they had some tea. They left to their respective homes. The old calendarists took their ball and went home. That's not reality. But the point is that I genuinely am certain that many people, and I doubt, God willing, they'll hear some of this today, but that they believe this insanity. That they really believe it was just some little academic dispute. Same thing with, I hate to say it, but it's kind of the same sort of cope that pro-Soviets deal with when they're talking about the MP. Oh, well, they were just in a disagreement. No, you don't try to flee like the police forces trying to kill you and end up in psychiatric hospitals, etc., because you're having an academic disagreement. They see you as a criminal. And if you're a criminal because you're Orthodox, then that's a problem. And that speaks to a deeper evil that I think, frankly, most people, when they talk about the true Orthodox, are completely unaware of. Hence why I put the word crimes in capital letters, to point out that these were crimes committed by criminals against innocent people, because, frankly, they don't see that. They don't know it. They assume it's not real. They have no concept of it. It's lost on them.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't get it. I mean, to me, it's crazy because obviously, I actually am surprised it hasn't been brought up yet. The appearance of the cross over Athens in 1925, probably arguably the most famous thing related to the struggle for the patristic calendar.
Sure.
I mean, if you read about that, and it's crazy how many people don't know about it. It's been talking about the memory hole. That seems like just no one's talking about it. Old Rocor constantly talked about it. It was in the Orthodox Word. Father Seraphim Rose talked about it in one of his letters. Like, it's so well known, it shouldn't be forgotten, but it's been forgotten.
But keep in mind that's because of dismantling of everything around it. That's how the memory hole works. In other words, you can't really have a cross in the sky in Athens if there's no real crowd of suffering believers to see it. If there's no real crowd of suffering believers being persecuted by the state. So you see, if you start taking away the state persecution, the crimes, you start saying the believers weren't really there, then it's very easy to say that the cross in the sky wasn't there either.
Oh yeah, I mean, but obviously, as we know, the story is truth. I mean, the police were there literally to beat and arrest people, and people are like, "Oh, that's not an issue." How is that not an issue? Yeah, but it's just complete nonsense when people say, "Oh, well, it's just like as you said, the old counters just took their ball and left." And it's like it was anything but that. It was mentioned earlier. Yeah, he was mentioned earlier in that blog spot you're reading, but Elder Philotheos Serakios. He was an interesting person. His relationship to true Orthodoxy it's a lot to go into. Obviously, he's most well known. Like even some of the new counters consider him to be a saint, but there's debates about whether or not he ever actually went to the new calendar. He was most famous for being Metropolitan Cyprian Aphilos and Orthos spiritual father. In fact, he was actually the one that told him to leave and join the Florentines. That's something that they just gloss over. It's like, oh, he actually told his spiritual son, who was a metropolitan, to leave and join the old Calendarists. But apparently he repented and went to the new calendar, according to the new Calendarists, but there's no evidence of that. He wrote a letter, and it's actually one that all these people love to quote because there's one specific part of it that they've edited. You probably have seen it before, Father Deacon, where it's like, oh, the old calendarists worship the calendar. The original letter, the Holy Synod of Resistance, they had the original copy of it, and it's on their website. So if you go to HCIR or HSAR.org, you can find it on there. He says some old calendarists have done that. He doesn't just write old calendarists, they've edited that. But that whole letter was written in defense of Metropolitan Cyprian and of the old calendar. In fact, he wrote in the letter, it's one of the first things in there, the only way they could ever depose people for following the patristic calendar, he was writing this letter to a new calendarist bishop, was if the old calendar itself was actually condemned by the church. And obviously that's not the case, as the First and Sixth Ecumenical Councils, like this one that people forget, the Sixth Ecumenical Council, explicitly set up dates to be followed on the Julian calendar. And we could also go over like the Synod at Whitby and all this other stuff, or the 3 times that the Sigillians.
The easiest witness you have for the traditional calendar is to use it daily, to remember the fathers and saints in your prayers of the day. Then everything becomes more obvious. If you're doing that, you will begin to notice how many people around you are really trying to push the Roman Catholic date for something. How many Roman Catholics agree with them? You'll begin to notice things like that and realize that's not my church. That's never, and I realize you're already true Orthodox, but the point is, who they commemorate makes a difference. Who you commemorate makes a difference. And I'm saying that to the audience in general. If you are not praying with the rest of the church on the traditional days, you'll eventually realize, and people say, that's why people like to say, well, the Sundays are still good on the new calendar. Church and Orthodoxy is not about Sunday. It's about every day. And so if you are using your calendar for your prayers every day, the difference will become obvious.
Yes, and I mean, there's also the fact that there's been at least 3 Sigillians I know of that have condemned the papal calendar. And it's interesting because people say, oh, those are forgeries, or they say, oh, it's just condemning the papal apostolon. The one of 1583 in particular says the papal apostolon and calendar. It says and calendar, not just apostolon, the other stuff too. But they'll say, oh, that's papal calendar and all stuff. But not to get into that. Going back to Elder Philotheos Serakios, his point that's like, oh, the only reason that you could ever depose and do all this stuff to old calendars legally would to be if the old calendar itself was condemned, which clearly it cannot be. And one, the new calendarists had never actually tried to do that, as Theos pointed out. They're still in communion with all the Serbs and all these other people that are on the old calendarists, albeit ecumenists. So
The church calendar, yeah.
yeah. So it's just such a simple point. I always point to the people. It's like, if it was such a big deal, we were schismatic. Why? Because we just chose to follow the patristic calendar? I mean, is the patristic calendar been condemned? Oh, you're just supposed to follow your bishop. Just follow what your bishop says. Like, that's not. No, if your bishop is telling you to do something that has been condemned multiple times by the church, how could you ever argue that that is the church? Because that's not a valid bishop. It's not. Bishop can't just tell you to do something that is against the teachings of the Orthodox Church. That makes him a false
You make him an
pastor.
anti-bishop. A false pastor.
Yeah, it's an anti-bishop. It's in place of a bishop. Not an actual bishop. It's the guy who's claiming to be there, the substitute teacher. But it's not really much of a teacher either.
Yeah, I think that's unfair to substitute teachers. Again, we're heading towards the last few minutes. We are in the last half hour of the live stream. So if you want to get your comments in, you want to call in, you can use the link above. Feel free. And yeah, until then, we're talking. We've been talking about the crimes of the Greek New Calendarists. Mostly that was in the first hour. But you're free to call about any particular issue related to Orthodoxy, or just feel free.
I will say a lot of what y'all have mentioned in regards to like the Greek state makes me think of Saint Augustine's City of God.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see why.
Yeah, no, it's the parts where he talks about the city of man and relates that to Rome. You look at Greece now and you're like, oh, good. You're supposed to be Christian, and you're definitely not being that at the moment.
Well, one of the good things about the City of God is that it's kind of written after, Rome's destruction. And to some degree, it's helpful, and I say this, it's helpful for readers as a blueprint for going forward as to how eventually they'll even blame the Christians for what is happening. But it also points us to the direction we should be focusing on, which is the heavenly city. Ultimately, that's we're in that scenario right now, except the destruction is ongoing. It has not been completed.
Wait, did my phone die? Hold up.
No, you're still there.
Okay, my phone is acting strange. Going with like new calendarists and old calendarists and whatnot, though, going back to that topic. It's been a while since I've read the life of Saint John the New Almsgiver. I don't remember if they ever tried to do anything to him, because obviously he's probably one of the more well-known true Orthodox saints in the West nowadays. There's been a lot about him recently. I don't remember if they ever tried to do anything to him specifically. I mean, there was Saint Germán. Oh, I'm sure, but I just don't really know. I mean, he spent most of his life at Mount Athos, so obviously Mount Athos was in resistance to a lot of it.
Right.
I mean, there's obviously Saint Germanos of Demetrius, which, he's mainly well known for being a confessor. He was one of the bishops that helped form the Old Calendar Synod in 1935, and
we can't forget Saint Matthew of Ravenna.
Oh yeah, that's been on the topic. I'm reading his life at the moment, but I haven't gone too far into that. But yes, just if you read what they did to these people, I mean, even if I could just see, if I was trying to put myself in someone else's shoes, as we're supposed to do, we're supposed to, be accommodating to people, even for the most diehard new calendarist. As long as you aren't like, just like, I don't think most people just are like, oh, we should kill people. We should kill old calendarists. I don't think that's a popular position, even within new calendarist circles. I hope it's not.
Not a popular. Well, it's not a popular position, but it's based on ignorance because that's what they did. And I defy everyone listening that if you look at the facts of this, that's something you point out, because until that happens, just even yesterday, before I before we had this show, there was somebody talking about senseless violence, and they're kind of giving it like a gotta hear both sides sort of thing. No, the true Orthodox weren't being violent. They were being treated violently, and we have to be honest about that. And that's part of the reason why we let, for lack of a better word, many of our new calendarist friends get away with that, because of the fact that they haven't bothered to even think about it. They haven't bothered to think about just how evil the churches that they've descended from went into. The point is, we can point to the new calendarist hierarchy, Greek hierarchy in America right now. But when you point out that it's descended from a hierarchy that literally killed true Orthodox Christians, that means something. If we're calling on our own history in terms of holy fathers who preserve the tradition, well, why aren't they calling on the fathers that they have that didn't? Why are they pretending our fathers are their fathers? Why is that sham should be obvious, and instead it's not?
As you sorry, I collect my thoughts first. What the new counters usually try to do is, like, when you point out, like, oh well, new counters, murdered multiple people, Saint Catherine of Attica, that I didn't even know until tonight about Saint Heracli of the other woman that was murdered by the new counters. They'll say, oh, what about that Matthew White nun? That's the one they always point to.
We actually did multiple shows on that, and that's.
I was about to tell the audience that you've done multiple videos on it. Yeah.
I feel the problem is that under any real legal standard, and I hate to let's assume the worst of Mother Miriam, but if it was anything under than a persecutory legal standard that was being used, if it was just a regular legal standard, she would probably be charged mostly with gross negligence. And obviously she was not a medical practitioner, but civil suits I could see. But realistically, I mean, she was a nun with a large monastery where people were staying during what was it, typhus outbreak, or what was the disease? Tuberculosis?
Yeah, I think it's tuberculosis. Yeah. So it was like a respiratory thing.
The point is this. I'm not being a great defender of Mother Miriam here, but how much can you really? It's not like she was hacking people up or anything. For them to call her a murderer, I mean, it was a politically motivated charge. I can see why a lot of people in that area and why her monastery consider her a saint. From their perspective, she was an over-disciplined nun during a very bad time period in history, and they falsely accused her of murder.
The new counters always point to her. And I always get confused because, like, I don't know if they just think, like, oh, they are old Calendarists nun murderers. Like, do they think she was, like, going around, like, chopping up new Calendarists or something? Because that's not what happened.
I think that that's, if they don't know better, I think that that's what they're trying to portray, because it makes them feel better about what they do know about how they treated us. I think that that's exactly
absolutely.
It. And I think that it should be pointed out that when you look at the facts of the case, that she was a nun who ended up, with poor treatments for people, and she did ask for their land because they were claiming to join the monastery, then, I mean, that's the standard monastic procedure to give up your items when you go to live in a monastery. So I don't know. I don't buy the whole murder thing, and I think it's just a cheap excuse that they're really pumping up now because the facts are making it obvious that they're descended from a bunch of murderers.
Oh yes, and I've actually had new counters do this to me where they say, "Oh, there's multiple old counters murderers." It's like, well, to my knowledge, there's only one. Yeah, I've asked them that. Like, yeah, I've always asked, like, to my knowledge, there's only one who's been accused of being a murderer, and yeah, it's so ridiculous because.
Well, keep in mind, in this period alone, just the first 4 years, you're talking about 5 or 6 martyrdoms. I only covered some of them. There's Father Patos of Patras. There's there's the two women who died in Attica. But the point is, once you get to the 1950s, it gets considerably worse. Then it's just much more killing. And so the point is, if they're trying to argue a moral high ground, that's a really weak position. And honestly, they should be called out on it immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
No worries.
These people, I don't know. I think I would like to believe that they're being honest, but a lot of times I see what they come to me with, and it's like I don't know if they're being honest or not. You know, and I
Just
pointed
ask
out.
them. Do you honestly believe this?
Yeah, that's a good one. I should probably try that. It's
Direct
like, do
is
you
best.
actually believe what you're telling me right now, or is this just the party line? Is this
This
what you
some
have
sort
to
of
believe?
regurgitated thing that's supposed to shut you up?
Yeah. It's like, do you actually believe this, or is this what you're being told you need to believe? I try that.
Are you chatting that right now?
What's that? No, I'm trying to write something down. I have a mechanical keyboard. I
Oh
apologize. It's
yeah.
super loud.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm trying to write something down. I'm doing it with one hand because I have phone
No
here.
problem.
Internet is
Well,
bad.
I
Very
mean,
bad
I'm
in this
not
part
seeing
of
any more
Louisiana.
questions in the chat. So, I mean, Aaron, did you have any other questions?
No other questions. Whenever you end up using that, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to stun lock them, and they're not going to have a response because they've never thought about it.
Well, the key is to get people to think about it so they realize where they are.
Well, that's going to be one of the interesting things. As my background being in the Jehovah's Witnesses, you would be surprised at the number of people when you confront them with what reality actually is.
Cognitive dissonance.
Oh, it goes beyond cognitive dissonance, Father. It goes into full-on, I will deny that the sky is blue.
Oh, that's just a stage of cognitive dissonance. that's
a very
the
late
stages of
stage.
grief.
That was the stage I'm used to, levels of stuff.
Well, you'll see a lot of that, but that's part of it.
There's that quote.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. There's that quote. What you're talking about with actually thinking about stuff, and it's always attributed to George Orwell, but I don't think he actually originally said the quote. I think he was quoting it from someone else. Or it's like, we know we're in some really bad stuff when thinking about something critically becomes a revolutionary act. It was the exact quote, I think it was in 1984, was, when thinking about something becomes a revolutionary act, that is when we are under tyranny. And people think about that in the political terms, but we could see that in spiritual terms as well. We're under spiritual tyranny of people demanding our obedience when they don't deserve it, i.e., new calendarists. Just going to call them out there.
We're in omnifaceted war.
Oh, yes. I think I have to head out here since I know you're trying to wrap up the stream, and I don't have much more to go over.
I don't see any comments in the chat. So first off, I want to thank you for being on. I want to thank Aaron for being on. I want to thank Wasner for being on. I want to thank everyone who contributed, from Father Anthony to Christopher to Tikon to, let me see, I want to get everyone in here, to Sava, to Maximus, to Jonathan, to Father Antonios. Thank you for that. And to everyone else who contributed.
Just posted.
Oh, someone just posted? Okay, well, let me see if it showed up. St. John of Kronstadt and Alexander Brown, St. John of Kronstadt in Bunnell, Florida, great parish. It is, I believe that is Father George Leotis, who I believe, if I remember correctly, that baptized me when into Orthodoxy. So in any case, keep looking, and we're going to keep on building and keep working on tradition. Okay, there's a small child complaining. I'm going to assume that is from next door. But let me see here. Again, everyone, thank you for listening. All the stars are dead. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you, everyone. We'll be doing more discussions over the week. And I'd like to thank you for everyone for listening and for being there. And again, thank you, and have a good night.
Have a good night, Father. Thank you for having me on.
Have a good one, Father.